Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dorian Wallace, and I am facilitating once again our conversations on This Machine Kills Fascists. Today, we are going to have a cool guy who just reached out
Yeah,
and wanted to chat, sent an essay that they're working on that completely aligns with everything that I'm trying to get out on the Substack and try to get out to as many people and voices as possible. But this is Anthony Vernon, and you came to me with this essay that you're working on called Fascism's Use and Abuse of Postmodernism. So
yeah,
before we begin, I'm just super curious about you, what you do, and why you're working on this.
yeah. I mean, I'll be as quick as possible because this stuff isn't about me. But basically, I'm an adjunct professor of philosophy at a couple of schools in South Florida. And typically, I'm a philosophy generalist. I just kind of talk about whatever, from like even stuff with like Rick and Morty, all the way to like, sort of like the state of being, right? So everything from ontology to Rick and Morty. But obviously, with just recent trends in the United States, right? Of course, there's arguments of, oh, should you have stepped up sooner, done this, notice that. At this point, right, I don't think there's any real point in looking at the past. And so on my end, I think it's necessary for myself and my colleagues and colleagues throughout academia to just simply give a middle finger to the BS going on, given that we are in an educational position and we are supposed to ideally be about open education, something that fascists are trying to squash right now, and something that certainly creates a lot of problems in the future where you have one sort of domineering, we'll just say, group being able to suppress the voices of, individuals, be it their gender, racial orientation, sexual orientation, national orientation. I unfortunately can go on.
Yeah, no, this is I think everything you're saying is completely valid and needs to be brought up. Immediately I thought of two things. The first was that every time we see fascist movements grow, we see pseudo-intellectuals at the forefront of it. This happened with Mussolini, with the futurists. This has happening currently right now with Silicon Valley and the current wave of fascism. But there's kind of this pseudo-intellectualism that is at the beginning of all these movements, and it's very important for people who their labor is intelligentsia to be using their platform, their position to be tackling these nonsense ideas. So that's the first thing. And then the second is, and I want to be clear with everybody listening and or watching, that uh, I'm going to be in this conversation as a layperson, so there might be some questions for any philosophy people. That's my dog. Some questions. There might be some things that I'm going to be missing, just to be upfront with everybody, and we're going to work through having these dialogues in a professional and respectful way.
Well, the good
Oh, go
thing
ahead.
about what I try to do, just to make
Mhm.
everyone feel easy, I work as a professor for intro classes. So as I said
Beautiful.
before, bringing up the Jerry Smith thing, right? I'll use Pokemon as example, Animal Crossing, right? I try my best to work with intro students, right?
That's
Students who
great.
have had no familiarity with philosophy. So I always try to do my best to bring like the good explanation without babying it down, right? So,
Right.
and I think I have been able to strike that sort of balance because, yeah, the sort of the stuff that, a lot of my work is focusing on is the relation between fascism and the very complicated idea of postmodernism that often just gets like misattributed as opposed to like, well understood. And I think on that last note, in terms of introducing, before I forget, the
Yeah.
big concern happens not when it's just pseudo-intellectuals computing to contributing to fascism, but when it's the quote unquote actual intellectuals. With the most famous example of this being Heidegger's joining of the Nazi Party.
Yeah, that is a very good example. Another one I'm thinking of is Carl Schmitt. He's actually pretty good in regards to how he wrote and how he processes thought. He's an absolute fascist, and his ideas are, very, very dangerous in a lot of ways. But I'll be honest, the friend enemy distinction, though it's a simplistic understanding of something, there is some communication in that to the general public that I find appealing, that needs to be discussed and spoken about. This is one thing that one thing that I'm personally interested in tackling this conversation is how do we uh, actually address the ways that people are drawn into fascism, as opposed to these sort of liberal oriented, individualistic, somebody goes down a wrong path, or somebody, it's how do we actually educate people about the social force of fascism itself, as something that is not a person's idea. It's actually a social force that spreads. And how do we educate on that?
Yeah, and I think bringing in the friend-enemy distinction is helpful. I've seen it in my own family, right? With a specific family member, someone who got me very much into film and punk music, right? Just over the years, the ideas, you know, uh, went more and more fascistic, where, he was a Q guy and all that sort of jazz. And then, his wife, my biological aunt, also, be influenced by these things. And one of the things that he hopped on very early, this was in like 2010, I think we had conversations about this, was fluoride in the water. And in 2010, when he's talking about fluoride in the water, it's like, you're okay, this is some obscure, nonsense weirdo stuff. Now, Dade County just voted to take fluoride out of the water, right? It is a mainstream view. And the thing is that there is no necessary friend-enemy distinction, because I think people misunderstand how fascism works. It's not like someone just wakes up, becomes like Jafar from Aladdin, and they're just like, I have the red cloak and the snake thing, and they're obviously like evilly, maliciously sneaking around, right? As you rightly said, fascism has a social influence, and I would argue that it's able to acquire that social influence through, postmodernism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the first thing I want to get into maybe about postmodernism is, as a layperson, I definitely have heard a lot of criticisms that I find valid of postmodernism. However, those criticisms eventually turn out to be center right, like, the we might call them the intellectual dark web at one point in time, or the contrarians, or all these various groups that their criticisms, they on the surface can seem reasonable, but when you start to actually dig into what they're talking about, they're really spreading colonial nonsense. So I want to one example, and I'm curious if this aligns with your understanding, and but oh my god. Oh my God. Sorry, the very famous postmodern French philosopher, Discipline and Punishment.
Foucault.
Yeah, Foucault. So Foucault, I know there's a lot of critiques of him. I will say that his book, Discipline and Punishment, helped me understand the prison system on a much more socially symbolic level, where at one point in time, the way that you treated punishment, the way that you treated uh, the handling of disciplining, was a gigantic public spectacle of an individual. So they would have people ears ripped off, and like parts of their bodies like severed off, or they'd be burned at the stake. Like, it was these dramatic public things. And there's a lot to it, where, number one, there weren't as many people around in the same way that there are today. Number two, death was a more common thing that people experienced, just by, I mean, they had children die more regularly, people died of disease more regularly. We try to imagine sometimes that it was more violent. It really wasn't more violent, but it was just that different types of violence were displayed differently in a way that we may not do it now. But the argument that Foucault makes is that over time, as we started to quote unquote become more civilized, in air quotes, as a society, the punishment turned into, instead of dramatic public executions or public displays of discipline, it transformed into uh, more of a we hide everything, we put everything away. And I mean, right now in the United States, the prison industrial complex just went up another level of insanity for me, for lots of people. But how we're now shipping people to El Salvador, we're now literally shipping people to other countries, and then saying, even if our own courts say you need to release this person, it's like, well, they're not in our jurisdiction, they're literally in
Right.
another legal structure. And so that is, I am so terrified that that's going to become the norm of how we treat the prison population. And
Yeah,
it
yeah,
just
the norm.
there's just
We
something so terrifying
No,
about this.
this is the thing that Foucault points out quite well because he is a uh, philosopher historian, right? He uses history to explain philosophy. And his method of history shows that there's not just one history of ideas for all of time. So, for the example in criminality, which is something I do a lecture on this, is show the nature of how our understanding of the criminal and punishment changes over time, that these ideas are not set steady states, right? That the postmodern is trying to show, hey, there are different understandings of things over time. There's no grand narrative on what criminality is, on what punishment is, right? And one of the people I also teach in this lecture is Angela Davis, right? Who
Yes.
offers the exact opposite sort of framework as what's happening right now with the building up of ICE detention centers also throughout the United States, the stock
Yeah.
prices launching of private prison companies. And so postmodernism, in some sense, is just that, that there is no grand unified narrative of any idea. Yes, there are things that have happened, there are things that have occurred, but saying that there is only one interpretation of all of these things is bunk. One of the main thinkers who points to this well, but isn't quite mentioned, is Emmanuel Levinas. What can be drawn out of him is a sort of notion of a hermeneutics of pacifism, that basically there is no end to interpretation, that one could interpret, even if you have the reality of the situation, right, the actual facts, you can still interpret from those facts. Interpretation is not necessarily correspondent to the thing. So the example I like to use in class on this one also for a different lecture is the Marjorie Taylor Greene space lasers. Funny example, but
Yes.
but
Yes.
right, for her that is an additional interpretation off the reality of those wildfires. We clearly had, you know, climatological conditions, and you know, maybe there was a random person who did a, you know, a like an arson act. You know what the climatologists and firefighters say? They don't 100% know. So they're being hermeneutically pacifistic. They're allowing for further interpretation, but they're like, look, this is what we got. Meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene is being hermeneutically violent in multiple ways, right? She has an end-all be-all interpretation. It's Jewish space lasers. And it's also violent in the sense that it's anti-Semitic and targets a group of people. And so the conflict here, in some main sense, is that, you know, in terms of interpretation surrounding postmodernism, postmodernism is on the side, hey, you can't have an end-all, be-all final interpretation, and the people who are against postmodernism want modern interpretations. They want a final stance, a pre-modern interpretation. They want to say, no, this is criminality. This is what happened. This is the end of the discussion.
Yeah, I just watched a clip with Sean Hannity and Taylor oh my goodness. I'll remember her last name in a moment, but she's an anti-fascist journalist, and just Taylor Lorenz. she's written a lot about far right movements. She's been just done a lot of really great work. She has a good YouTube channel that breaks down a lot of things going on within the far right. But anyways, she was on with Sean Hannity, and she had been to the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is where Luigi Mangione is being held currently. And she reported basically she was interviewing the groupies that were outside. You know, they think he's like kind of a sexy like superhero kind of person. So she wrote about this, and Sean Hannity would not let the clip get to. He was like, why are you celebrating this murder of this father and husband? Why are you celebrating this? And she's like, I'm not celebrating this. In fact, nobody I interviewed was celebrating this. I reported that they found Luigi to be heroic, but they had no like praise for the actual murder act. It was more the symbolic act. But the thing that was so disturbing was Taylor Lorenz kept, I mean, disturbing not because it was very easy to see through what Sean Hannity was doing, but it was just disturbing to realize there's a large piece of his audience that is just going to be aligned with what he was saying. But what he was saying was, do you condemn these opinions of these people? And she's like, I am a journalist. I went to the right rally. I didn't condemn those people. Like nobody
Right.
I am writing down what people are saying, and I am interpreting that this is a response to the healthcare system, which is what we need to talk about. And so Sean Hannity keeps redirecting away from her bringing up the actual discussion, which is about the broken healthcare system. And in fact, there's one point, and I'm not getting it right, but there's one point where he even jumps in and starts to give his own idea of like a way that healthcare could really be improved. So not only does Taylor not give any idea of socialized healthcare or
Hmm.
get to bring up the argument that we are the only pro-capitalist neoliberal country that I stopped saying first world, by the way. We're the only like pro-capital country that does not have some form of universal or single payer healthcare, or just public access healthcare. And it's he would not allow her to say that at all. And it was but anyway, sorry to finish the thought.
Yeah.
He had his idea was some like ridiculous privatized like voucher, just some nonsense, like where it was like, dude, like this is the same argument every time, and you're blocking what her actual point is and making it a moral argument about praising death. And the last thing I'll put on this is coming from a dude who I remember celebrating when Osama bin Laden died. And
Yeah.
I am no fan of the actions of Osama bin Laden, but I am also aware that there are much larger my issues with Osama bin Laden are killing of civilians and the fact that he's a fucking one percenter. He's a billionaire. like those are my issues with him. Um, but anyways, they were celebrating this death, and it's like, if you want to go by body count, the CEO has a much larger body count than Osama bin Laden. And yeah, so anyways, I didn't mean to ramble
Well,
on that tangent.
in the spirit of hermeneutic pacifism, right? Right, it's not mentioned by Levinas directly, but it's one of those things that I draw out of his work. And the reason I call it pacifistic, right? Because at the end of the day, the pacifistic method isn't trying to go, hey, this is the better fact, this is the right? In the same way that journalist was just trying to, document an interpretation. What is your own interpretation? I'm not imposing. Here's a general idea, right? Which also shows her having generally hermeneutically pacifistic behavior by showing up on Fox, right? As an anarchist journalist, even, right? To show up to this event, to that event, right? And, at the end of the day, yes, people do like stand somewhere, right? Like ultimately, nobody can be perfectly hermeneutically pacifistic, just open to any and all of the thoughts, even though this is what Levinas called for in my own example, right? I'm a social democrat. I am also a just pacifist in general. I'm anti all, usage of violence, regardless of who it is upon. So, wait, we do still have the ability to interpret reality, obviously, right? And, there's a big push on the left right now that these interpretations must correspond, must have facts, right? There is this dismissal of anything that could be based off of feelings, opinions, understandings, right? These sort of open-endedness. Meanwhile, the fascists do not care. What the fascists make use of is both methods at the same time. So, what fascists will do, they'll use any and all information and any and all interpretations towards their end. That's why you can see a lot of fascist hypocrisy. But it's not necessarily hypocrisy. What fascists care about is one truth, right? They are postmodern on everything except for the one truth of hypernationalism. This is the one common thread in Mussolini, Franco, Batista, Trump, etc. of the sort. They are hyper-nationalists, which also explains why it comes in different flavors. But to put it simply, right, this is also, as you were saying before, a lot of the critiques of postmodernism come from the right. Yes, it's an ironic state of affairs, right? They want to dismiss postmodernism and use postmodernism so no one can point back on them and go, wait a sec, you're using postmodernism as a tactic to your own sort of ends. And so they will dog on these postmodernists that, a trend that used to exist on the left that was very good at critiquing society, such as Foucault, who again has his problematic things as a person, right? But
Oh
what,
yes.
to say the least, but um, in this sort of sense, right? You can see Jamaica Kincaid, a wonderful literary author, right, have some postmodern tendencies that speak a lot of truth about the island of Antigua. And so I think this is the problem at hand, right? You have one side always needing to prove the facts, and they've put themselves in that box. Meanwhile, these fascists can simultaneously be like, hey, show me the facts. Oh, what? What about those facts? No, they don't feel right. Get them out of here, right? And so it's a tactical disadvantage that is had when you choose to not use a rhetorical, hermeneutic, interpretive tactic.
Yeah, there's a piece that it really resonates with that. I mean, first off, the first far right critic of postmodernism who is absolutely weaponizing postmodernism, the person I just think fits that archetype is Jordan Peterson.
Of course.
Like that dude, that that dude, when he first really came out, I was still in school for music therapy, so I was just beginning to learn about all the different schools of psychology and everything. And it was like, okay, this dude is like very smart. I don't agree with what he's coming to, but he's very, very smart. But fast forward over time, when actually start to understand how to read the psychological literature and understand what his expertise is versus what he's actually saying. So the dude is actually a published author, and this is where all his psychology credentials come from. He's actually an expert in personality. So he studies personalities. That's what a lot of his research was in. It's what a lot of his academic writing was in. So that is where his actual expertise of psychology comes from. But then he goes out and speaks as if he's a Jungian psychologist. Now, the thing is, Jungian psychologists today treat Jung as a philosopher who developed some very good foundational techniques, though his actual science is pseudoscience. And like, I'll give an example is Jung has really helped me when communicating in hospice care for people who have a religion or non-religion that I do not agree with or understand or feel the same way. It helped secularize language. So I can speak with somebody who may be a conservative Christian and I can still talk to them in language using stories that are relatable. And that's how Jungian psychology is contemporarily used within professional mental health practices. And I mean it's a lot deeper than that, but Peterson is coming out and almost acting like these archetypes are factual material realities, but he mixes that with psychological jargon. And to be super frank, the way I personally started to figure out he was a bullshit artist was I would take his like things he would say and put it into the thesaurus app, and it would just kind of simplify it. It would be like, the problem with society is we're not working hard enough. And it's like, what a fucking con artist. Like this dude is a fraud. And so yeah, anyways,
But I think it's important, not to lose train of thought, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah, Peterson is not a fascist. He is a transphobe. He's a bunch of other horrible things, but he's not a fascist because his end goals aren't hyper nationalistic, right? He's not like, Canada should be the best or America should be the best, right? He's just, anti-woke, anti-trans, right? All of these things, which I shouldn't say just, but, to move
Right.
forward from my language in that sort of regard, right? What we end up with, as you said before, right, that a proper therapist will use all the tools at hand for them in their proper setting and context, right? So for many individuals, though, right, it's like science is the end all be all. We need to just be scientific about things. In
Right.
philosophy, there's the debate between being analytic versus continental, right? For me, I'm the type of thinker where it's like, look, use what works. It doesn't matter if Jung is more of a philosopher or a psychologist. If he helps you with people from other religions, amazing, right? Nietzsche, who referred to himself as a psychologist, right? Who is technically the father of psychoanalysis. Great. He accidentally started a whole branch and field of psychology that turned out to think it was scientific, not as scientific as we thought. Doesn't matter, right? Nietzsche can be very useful for someone to get some confidence and pride in themselves and work through struggle. You look at Stoicism and it's like, its contributions to positive psychology, in that sort of regard of, hey, it can be a useful tool. The thing that ends up happening with all of this, right, is that when you have these sorts of mixed uses of tactics, you can be more effective because you can reach out to more types of people, right? You can reach out to people on the basis of facts, statistics, opinions, and feelings. This is something that at least the modern global left fails to do because they want objective reality. We are still stuck in Kant and liberalism in the sense of needing objective reality, right? And for Nietzsche, he's like, look, there is a way things work, right? Zhuangzi, another philosopher, there is a way things work. But our feelings, our opinions, right, are always shaping the things that are happenstantial in reality.
Mm. Wow. Wow. No, that's very heavy. That's very, very heavy.
Yeah.
So I'd like to get into your essay a little bit. Do you have it pulled up on your end?
No, I mean, I think I can explain it better than just the writing it
Yeah,
down
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
now we've
yeah,
done the setup. Now that statement is the
yeah.
setup. So it's like, okay, right?
Beautiful.
The what you have currently is a group of fascists who pretend to be postmodern, who pretend to be like the individuals using a combination of feelings and notions and non-grand narratives to, bring people over to their side. The problem is that fascists are fake postmodernists. They have a late modern interpretation of reality. They love their nation, be it El Salvador, be it the US, be it, fascist Italy, etc. of the sort. And I think one problem at hand that's happening with a lot of people trying to understand fascism right now is they're not going back to the source. Have you read Mussolini's The Doctrine of Fascism?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes. How many
Yeah.
individuals who are talking about fascism right now are making reference to it?
I would say zero, maybe Steve Bannon. Like,
Right,
yeah,
exactly. And the issue at
Yeah.
hand, it's like it is a scary essay to read because you can read the reflections, right? You can read the
Mhm.
reflections of Mussolini talking about everything is towards the state. We will do whatever we want for the state, right? Literally talking in postmodern terms in that sort of essay to be like, look,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what we do as long as it benefits the state. Violence, education, organization does not matter. Everything is for the state.
Wow. This is a very good place to speak about Julius Evola. How have you read Riding the Tiger?
I have
I'm
not.
I'm shaking. It's like literally the worst book I think I've ever read in my life. But so Julius Evola was a far right fascist philosopher, and he actually considered himself further right than the Nazis because he thought that Hitler and Mussolini were too pro working class. Uh, so he was actually more monarchistic, but through a fascistic lens. And the thing that is really worthwhile about his book Riding the Tiger is it feels like it's being written by somebody who would be an incel or a mass shooter today. It really does read like one of those one of that sort of ideological framework where it's this serious hatred of women is just in the entire text, and everything in the world is literally meant for a specific group of aristocrats who have earned this place as aristocrats, but they have not been given it because of, and they fill in the blank of whatever reason. And it it also I don't mean this in a mean way. And I try to talk in a blunt way. That's how I try to communicate. But it's just there's a lack of depth and critical thought in the book. It's sort of these assumptions of hierarchy. It doesn't actually prove why this hierarchy is there or why we should align with it. Like there's no any evidence. But then the last but not least piece of it is it also shows that there is this strange obsession with uh Asian cultures and cultures from the eastern part of the world, where I mean you can look at the Nazi movement and their obsession with the Aryan race, which was an ethnicity literally from what we would call modern day India, but even look at today with the obsession with anime and just there's some bizarre white supremacist obsession that is like it 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 disposes of darker skinned people of color as they are only to be labor, and it utilizes our community members of Asian descent. It utilizes their otherness as like this like enlightenment, but they're also willing to drop a bomb on this community if needed. It's just there's something
Yeah,
very
these
colonialist about it.
so these tendencies can occur, right, in
Yeah.
fascism, but they're not universal occurrences of fascism. When you get down to fascism, it's hyper nationalism. But again, each nationalism is going to work towards its own nation, right? Famously, George Carlin, talks about the fascists coming with a peace sign, right? Obviously, it's a joke, but still, they come with different symbology that each nation uses its own symbology. Mussolini found the Nazis to be deviating from his original fascism partially because of this usage of foreign cultures, right? He found them to be weirdo pagans, right? And in this sort of regard, this is something that does emerge, right? Like, this sort of, new sort of revelry, but also making use of the national religion, but also not really respecting it. Because again, the main goal for fascists is use whatever you can. Doesn't matter if it's here, there, or anywhere to make the state as powerful as possible, right? And so what all of these things are trying to do is just pull people to one side, right? They're looking for collaborators, for example. Being in Miami and being a Cubano myself, right? I am quite personally annoyed at how many members of my community are in support of fascism, quite frankly, out of the specter of communism, right? I am an anti-communist personally for, again, very personal and ideological reasons. Obviously, one taints the other, not going to lie there. But at the end of the day, right, you would hope that a community that faced extremism, that faced, sort of a dictatorial control, could see it somewhere else, right? If it's a community that claims to not like these things, they could hate it somewhere else. But again, what did Trump do better than the Democrats? Well, he knew something about uh, Latino communities that the Democrats did not. We are not one big homogenous lump, right? There are different issues between Cubanos and Mexicanos, right? Venezuela and Argentina have vastly different things going on. And so what Trump was able to do is he'd roll on over to the Cubans, it's like, and the Venezuelans, like, hey, we're anti-communist, right? Then he'd roll over to the Mexicans and be like, yeah, only some of you are rapists and murderers, but like, you don't want the bad ones taking advantage of you, all the good ones, right? Again, whatever rhetoric is need be. And so in this, right, this is also why fascism can be hard to identify because it just makes use of whatever it can. So the focus on fascism, again, yes, the racism and the usage of symbols is something important to like talk about and critique. But the main sort of end is being like, wait, what is the end goal? What are they trying to get at in the end? Because fascism, again, in that Bannon term, floods the zone. Here's anime, here's some Jainism symbols, here's Mussolini's chrome dome all over the place, right? They just throw everything at the wall to get enough people to go, hey, look at the greatness of the state, the greatness of the state. We're the best state, we're the best state, we're going to be great, we're going to restore ourselves, because all of these other people have been trying to get us down. But again, it doesn't matter. Whatever can be done to prop up the state in a hyper nationalistic sense.
Wow. Yeah. This are you familiar with the three-way fight? Devon Zane Shaw.
I am not.
It's a really interesting concept that breaks down basically breaks down the left-right spectrum into a triad as opposed to a
Like a
dyad.
dyad.
Yeah. So the concept is that it is neoliberalism or the state. There is reactionary chauvinism or fascism, and then there is revolutionary socialism or autonomous movements. And the thing that I find interesting about this is that these are more how it gives kind of an insight on how somebody can be utilizing maybe working class talking points, but they're actually like they're criticizing neoliberalism. They're
Mhm.
criticizing the contemporary democratic state. They're offering those sorts of criticisms, but their solutions are not people oriented or not horizontally oriented. Um, and the thing that I really like about the three-way fight and sort of applying Amy Cesar's discourses on colonialism, if you're familiar with that text, the thing that I like about what he brings up is basically the large summary is colonialism is exported fascism and fascism is imported colonialism, meaning that the behaviors that the colonized world experienced was and is fascistic, and in fact what happened to the people in the Holocaust, the Jewish people, Roma people, LGBTQ people, mentally disabled people. The it was almost it was what European colonizers had been doing to other communities for a couple centuries at that point. And the reason why I think it's a really interesting to apply discourses of colonialism with three-way fight is that you can almost look at Mussolini's fascism, which is much more of a strict internal keep this as strong as possible, and it almost indicates why Mussolini's fascism allowed the power of the monarch and the power of the Catholic Church, where Hitler did not do that. And so it's really interesting because if you apply the three-way fight, uh, one thing that Hitler did is he was taking a lot of reactionary chauvinist talking points and feelings, but then moving it through a neo-colonial, neoliberal state applied apparatus. Because what did Hitler do that the other fascists did not do is he started uh, to really try to take over in a different
That's not
way. Oh,
necessarily true. Obviously, Mussolini wanted a neo-Roman Empire with his conquest of Ethiopia, his attempted conquest of
yes,
Libya, his successful of Albania, attempts into Greece. So yeah, no, I think there is definitely a
yes,
connection
yes,
between imperialism, because that's going to show off state greatness. To also connect the
right.
things you were saying with colonialism, and to bring back to what I mentioned earlier, right? She talks about in the book how Britain tries to export the greatness of Britain onto Antiguans. Look how awesome Britain is. Look how awesome Britain is, right? So that is a colonial trend to be like, hey, the colonizer nation has the better country. We can see this in West Africa with France being like, hey, we're going to make everyone French and this is going to make people better, right? Like, so in this sort of regard, I can definitely see the argument there, the connection between the two. Haven't read the text myself.
Yeah.
And in that sort of regard, right, again, it's state greatness, right? Because again, you know, be it what you think about the socialist or communist regimes that emerged around the world, right? At the end of the day, right, their at least stated goal was for workers and material conditions, right? They weren't necessarily saying, hey, we're going to make our country great, right? They were saying, hey, we're going to improve these conditions. Now, again, the fascists, what they always do are like, hey, make America great again, a third Reich, with Bukele, who is definitely probably on that track, right? Talking about, like, hey, we are the safest country, we're the safest country, right? Like, sort of propagating the greatness of the nation at all other costs. And so the concern out here is not just what it will do to people internally, it can also then, well, give even greater excuses towards colonization, right? It is colonization with no sort of like at least attempted liberal strings of like, oh, but what about human rights? What about like, no, our state's the greatest. We need to spread the greatness of our state into Greenland, into Albania, into Poland, wherever it may be.
Yeah, no, you are correct. Thank you so much for correcting me about the my comment about Mussolini and empire and imperialism, because this is just a prime example for anybody listening that as quote unquote woke as people can be and as much work as we can
Oh,
do,
we all get stuff wrong.
there can still be that Eurocentric shade of things that just gets in the way. And I unintentionally dehumanized all the victims of fascism that Mussolini had enforced imperialism upon. So
Well, that's the thing.
thank you for that.
No, I mean, there's no worry about necessarily being perfect, right? I think at the
Sure,
end of the
sure.
day, it's more like, look, man, like
Yeah.
clearly right now the bigger concern is individuals who have very clear negatory intent, and I think hyper-nationalism is always a clear negatory intent for sure, right? Because a lot of harms internally and externally can be justified. Again, how a particular nation shapes itself under hyper-nationalism, who knows? But it always is problematic, right? It's maybe going to target different groups each and every time, right? In the United States, the emphasis has been on illegal immigrants as like the main group to go after. And trans individuals and
Trans, yeah.
but again, other groups are a part of that structure too. Even me saying that may not be perfect, but again, by and large, there's arguments for that.
Mhm.
Whereas opposed to Germany, right? It was Jewish elements. In Italy, it was the socialists, right? So, right, and then
Correct.
only later did Italy go after the Jews under Germany's behest, right? The national identity of Italy had nothing to do with anti-Judaism, right? The national identity there was the sense of being financially cheated. And so it was this difference between a group of people who went, oh, we've been financially cheated, right? Let's distribute to the people, i.e., the vast number of socialists, versus, hey, we got cheated by these other countries. We need to become a strong nation ourselves, right? So that was the main conflict there. The socialists were the ones targeted in Italy, the Jews mainly, and individuals with physical, mental, gypsies, etc., disabilities. Wait, gypsy disability. Again, imperfect speaking again.
Somebody just rang my door. I just have to go check it. So sorry.
Yes, I can pause.
Yes, one moment. Sorry.
Ah,
Thank you for that. Sorry about that.
of course.
Yeah, yeah. So yes,
Yeah.
continue.
But I think that, no, I think I made the point. That's basically because of different nationalist expressions, different people are going to be targeted, which makes, again, noticing the fascism a lot harder because it's like, well, they're not going after Jews. It's like, no, like fascism is not just Nazism. And I think that's something a lot of
Yes.
Americans are very bad at understanding.
That's a huge piece about this where so I have 2 points that I'm really curious about your perspective on. The first point is it is one of the things I've found so complicated to communicate with members of my own community is that fascism is not the outfits and the doing the Sieg Heils and like it is not that it is the social process of domination and control and so I want to point out that that's one reason it's been so challenging to communicate that Donald Trump is fascist and Elon Musk is fascist. Now, I want to go to the second point, and I'm really curious what your thoughts are on this because both Elon Musk and Donald Trump have shown pretty intense connections to Nazism. Donald Trump's second wife's divorce, it was mentioned in the divorce proceedings that he kept Hitler's speeches, which is, Mein Kampf 2, basically. But he had a copy of that on his bedside. And there is a whatever that says about a person, the fact that it was brought up in divorce proceedings means it was some issue that needed to be attended to during divorce proceedings. So he's shown signs to have a serious interest in Hitler and Nazism. The reason why I think it's important to point out that it was not Mein Kampf, but his collection of speeches is that is somebody who is studying Hitler. Like there are two types of people that I think have read the second Mein Kampf, and that is people like me who really want to understand fascism and people who are ideologically drawn to it. So the other thing is John Kelly, who I thoroughly think is a far right lunatic. He spoke about how Donald Trump really viewed himself. He really respected the way the Nazi generals responded to Hitler, and he really views himself in that light. So those are just two, I mean, direct, just showing a connection to Nazism with Donald Trump, or at least an interest in it. The second is Elon Musk. I find him to be a very intentional. He's very intentional with his dog whistles, like his "My heart goes out to you" thing. That was you could just the way it came off to me like he had rehearsed that. Hey, he had practiced how he was going to do it. He knew his response was already going to be, "Oh, they're so crazy." And the reason why I make this argument is couple of days prior, he had changed his Twitter profile picture to a Keck the Frog in a Roman soldier armor and playing a video game. He also changed his name to Keckius Maximus. And the way I interpret that is he's telling everybody he's a Nazi playing a video game. And that's how he sees what he's doing. But then the last point is he spoke at the ADF and he spoke about keeping German culture preserving German culture, and he made reference to needing to stop the elites. And this is literally the richest man in the world. And and it's like, who the fuck are the elites, bro? And we know exactly what that means. It's an anti-Semitic dog whistle. And the thing I'm really curious about your interpret or your just what your thoughts are on those pieces of info, where it's really interesting to me how the it's been challenging to say that these people are not literal Nazis. They're a form of fascism, but they're not literal Nazis. And it's been very interesting to see the more powerful they get, the more their Nazi interest really starts to show. Because I think they do view themselves as the next Hitler or in that lineage. I really do get that. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, so this is a common thing in fascists talking about trends, right? Ordinary Things just had a great video on Mussolini, and
hmm.
he portrays very well how the Roman salute was not a thing in historical Rome, but part of a film, right? And so then Mussolini starts using it at his rallies, and then Hitler takes that Roman salute, which obviously is the famous Sieg Heil, right? So fascists will borrow things from each other. Again, it's a strategy of just use whatever for the state. Now, is the state sometimes an illusion for the monarchical head? Yes, right? Of course, like the cult of Mussolini, the cult around Hitler, or as John Stewart, made fun of very well, how like all the members of like Trump's cabinet have to like basically, blow him off before, they talk about him. Like, oh, Mr. Trump, oh, your hair is so perfect. Oh, your tariffs are so beautiful, right? So, like, yes, there are these general sorts of trends, but the expression of the dictator, right, and the adoration towards that is to allow the dictator to then wield, hyper nationalistic power, right? The leader, the Hitler, the Trump, the Mussolini, right? They fill in as the individual who both is the state and wields the greatness or the future greatness and the power of the state to only make it greater for the genuine Italians, the genuine Germans, the genuine Americans, etc. of the sort.
Yeah, yeah. That thank you for that insight. So just if I can repeat it back just to make sure it
Yeah,
made
yeah.
sense. So it's almost that these groups, they may not literally emulate what past or congruent or uh movements that are ideologically aligned, they may not um completely fit into that shell, but they will take from each other
Mhm.
and learn from each other. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm going to refer to Benito Mussolini's The Doctrine of Fascism. He praises competition, competition, competition. To use an NBA metaphor, love basketball, right? Think about the type of players that use Kobe's fadeaway, and even players that use Kobe's fadeaway on him, right? And how Kobe Bryant also copied his skill set from Michael Jordan, right? All of these guys are in competition with one another, but they will still use what worked for them. Did Kobe play exactly the same as Jordan? No. Has anyone who's ever shot on Kobe played exactly the same as Kobe? No. But there is this borrowing towards one's own advantage, towards one's own ends, right? And so, in that sort of sense, right, this is why both it was a Roman salute and not a Roman salute. That is why Trump is both, dog whistling. But what are you talking about? You didn't hear any whistles, right? This is the thing that fascists will do. They will use both the facts of a situation towards their end amongst some people or even all, and they'll use the feelings and the, an interpretation, amongst other people or amongst all, right? This is this double reality that fascism creates, or even a triple reality, a quadruple reality, because again, it's that series of hermeneutic interpretations that go on and on. But they pretend to be postmodern by having all these interpretations, but the buck stops it. We love our state. Our state is the greatest, and our state's going to be the greatest against all others. The will to life that the fascists have, that life is making sure that your nation, at the end of it all, stands as the best nation against all others. It is pro other countries becoming fascist too, right? This is also why you have Elon Musk speaking before the ADF, why you have this collaboration. They want competitors. They're ready to go, right? They'll work together towards their ends initially, but if, let's say, the ends of the Axis had won, oh, they're going at each other immediately. That was something a lot of historians point to. Why? I mean, not Japan, but at least you have two fascist regimes on the door against each other that are pro-state competition. It was going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't a prediction, but I have a sense that whenever Musk and Trump accomplish whatever they've worked out between them, they're going to become bitter enemies. Like it just it's that just from a psychological analysis on how a lot of these figures operate, they utilize each other just as they utilize anyone else. They're objects as a way to get to some perceived top, some perceived control.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean there's uh I don't know if you're aware of this piece of my work, but I do cult recovery
Yeah.
work for cult survivors, and there's some interesting insights in those spaces where and this is less philosophical, this is more psychological but behavioral is how I describe it. Not behavioralism, because that I think is actually utilized a lot within fascism. But anyways, uh, it's really interesting because one of the jokes that happens amongst the survivor community is that when they start to describe their abuser, and this could be an ex-partner, this can be a priest, this can be a new age guru, this can be a boss, a toxic boss who keeps somebody working, even off hours, like holds things over your head. The 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 joke amongst the survivor community is, wait, did my guy like go to your place? Like, because it just sounds like they're talking about the same person. And
Yeah.
what is really interesting is, for instance, I have had a group that had somebody who was a former American Nazi Party member and somebody who was a former Hasidic from the Satmar community in the same group. They were both in their recovery spaces. They were both, at then their personal journeys past any of the bigotry or any of those things. But
Yeah.
there was some uncomfortable dialogues in that session that were important to get through, because it did help humanize the experience on just the behavior that patterns that abusers are utilizing. And one thing that the cult dynamics is really interesting is we speak about how cults can be as small as an abusive partner, or even as small as a single like parasocial relationship, like what happens with QAnon, where there's not
Or
necessarily.
catfishing to make it
Yeah,
even smaller.
yeah, exactly. It can be anything that small all the way to nation states like Nazi Germany, where there is a unbelievable praise towards a single individual, even though the single individual is very clearly, from many outsiders, their behavior is extremely damaging, and it's an interesting
But
perspective.
let's use cult in its original way to understand that, almost these Dionysian cults, right? Where the energies of a concept get put into a being, right? Dionysus both being the representative of wine, reincarnation, rebirth, right? And so what happens with a lot of these fascists is that the figure becomes the symbol of that place in and of itself, right? Trump is America. Trump is patriotism. Trump is liberation. Trump is freedom, right? And so you'll hear like Pam Bondi simultaneously talk about how we need to be loyal to Trump and loyal to America because they become one and the same thing. The fascist demagogue becomes the representative of the hyper-nationalist state, becomes the representative of the greatness of that state in the same way the imperator was the representative of the greatness of Rome. And to the point where the Caesars, right, amongst some, not the majority of Romans, that's often a conflation, were viewed as gods, right? And in this same sort of way, right, a lot of these cult religions, before we use the term cult to talk about incidents like
Right.
Waco, Texas, the cult was simply a group that gathered in worship of a representative thing that they desired, right? Whether it be the Dionysian revelry or the Apollonian order. And a lot of these cults did one and the same, right? Mixing the Apollonian and Dionysian to praise both chaos and order simultaneously. So this sort
Yeah.
of human tendency to praise conceptuality and abstraction carries over with fascism, except the abstraction being praised is whatever the nation values because ultimately, right, the nation is an abstraction, right? These things are, exist only due to, again, social cohesion, organization, as you've been talking about. And so,
Yeah.
yes, there is some sort of cult status, not just in the sense of like, oh, look at this cult that gets people to do dangerous things. It's cults in the sense of praising a individual as a concept.
Wow. Yeah, this is great because so one thing I want to put clear out to anybody listening, the term cult, the way we sort of understand it colloquially, I can't say the word
Colloquially,
colloquially.
yeah,
Thank you. Sorry, like, been
all
talking
good.
long enough. My mouth is dry now. But yeah, uh, a lot of the reason we hear that word that way is because of the Charles Manson murders, which was happened right around when TV became national broadcast. That's where everybody got their information. And keep in mind, within 9 years, Jonestown happened. So the word cult within a decade, due to just the way media spoke about the event, and not even maliciously, just how the word became associated with these toxic groups. Now, the technical term is called high control group, and but it just doesn't have as much of a flair, to be like, hey, you watch any high
Doesn't have
control
that
doc?
cult status.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly. It does make it a little confusing sometimes when using the word cult because we're not really
No,
using
but
the
it works
word
in both senses. That's why I
exactly.
bring it up because it works both in that modern sense of a hyper control group and in that ancient sense of worshiping a concept, right? This hyper
Yes.
control group that wants the embodiment of a concept, be it America, Italy, Germany, etc.
Well, and so one thing that is very common in cults is the changing of identity. You can see this with the kids that end up in gangs that we work with. They all have street names. They've got their government name and they've got their street name, and they really do become a different person when they're their street name. Same thing happens. I'll use the United States Army, but you start to become an army of one just through the way that basic training happens. And these are just to show how these dynamics happen in various ways and various intensities. But to get to the really specific piece of it, in the most extreme examples of high control groups, the leader has another name that people are required to call them. So, for instance, in the Nexium cult, Keith Raniere was called Vanguard. For instance, in R. Kelly and his sex trafficking and uh, sexual abuse group of women he had under his control, they all had to call him Daddy. He was utilizing standard pimping
Yeah,
procedures, but like
yeah,
that's the thing. This stuff
yeah,
is, it's almost like there's a handbook. but
yeah.
um but this goes into think of the Fuhrer and think of El Duce
Hmm.
and the thing that I find so interesting about Donald Trump specifically is he has somehow utilized his name Trump to be a licensure. Because there's a book by Naomi Klein, I think it's No Is Not Enough, and it did a really good job breaking down um Donald Trump's how he does not view himself as a businessman. He views himself as a marketer, and so he is. And now I'm going to switch really quickly to psychologists working, or
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
music
yeah.
therapists working in these spaces. People who tend to be narcissistic oftentimes have pretty fragile egos, and so if you say something that hurts their ego, they will retaliate. Well, so back to the Naomi Klein interpretation, she speaks about how Donald Trump can almost, he just says, like, people say he's a shitty businessman and it doesn't even harm him because he understands he's not a businessman, he's a marketer. And that's why if you look at uh all of his businesses that have failed, they were actually not his businesses. They were businesses that were owned by other people that licensed his name. So that's where he was. He really created his name as almost its own separate identity. It became a brand in and of itself. And the piece that is just very interesting about that is we can say Trump, and that almost represents something besides the man
Yeah, I mean, there's
himself.
Trumpism as a term for that very reason. And I
Yeah.
think at the end of the day, is it a coherent ideology? Also, no. Because what it is, it's an empty
Yeah.
symbol representing the vague general ideas of an individual, right? The
Yeah.
Führer, right? If you look at like Nazi internal policy, it's absolutely all over the place, right? They called themselves National Socialists, but they passed no socialist policies, right? Or
Yes.
not really. So, yeah, it's this mess of incoherentness because the only goal is, hey, make the state strong. How are we going to do it? We'll get to that, right? The point being, you first get the state power, then you just assert power on others, right? It's very a
Yeah.
limited reading of Nietzsche, right? That everything is a will to power. What people who aren't Nietzsche scholars get into that is, oh, power is just punching someone in the face. And Nietzsche talks about that is a form of power. You could punch someone in the face. But for him, what he says is the most powerful is overcoming, right? The power to overcome hardship, sickness.
Right.
And he was talking about himself as a sickly man. And he also
Right.
wrote simultaneously that all philosophy is a reflection of internal psychology. And so, what fascists are quite often is they rally around the nation to make up for their fragile ego. In very Kohut terms, right? A narcissist, and you probably know this, a narcissist is not someone that's like espousing their own greatness. What they do is they create a shadow version, a reflection of themselves to put all of their ego energy into and then espouse that as the great thing. And so there is a connection there between fascism and the Kohutian narcissism in that you put all of your energy, your attention, into, making this identity of your nation great, right? And that's the greatness. And you are a part of that greatness. You are a part of the body of that greatness, which then further adds to the criticism, which is proper, of fascism being a death cult. So I know I tried to kind of pull a lot of
Wow.
strings there together, but I think all of this is part of the whole picture of like the death of oneself towards the nation, right? I know I'm trying to point everything back to hypernationalism, but that's what it is. You die to
Yes.
oneself, right? In the Kohutian narcissism, right? To place all of your ego, your power, your energy into the greatness of this state. How are you going to do it? Don't worry, just put in all the energy, put in all your willpower into making that great, which is a misreading of what Nietzsche was talking about. Willpower, the will to power, is the will to have the power to overcome a situation first and foremost. But these fascists who read Nietzsche went, oh, That's just about punching someone in the face. That's the most obviously powerful thing. So there is a stupidity in that of I'm going to bring myself to death to put in all my power into the state. So my state is really good at being great. And that hyper-nationalism, no wonder why it always results in someone being invaded.
Oh. So just because we're coming up on, near an ending
Near the
point.
mark, yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to actually bring this into just a final area, because I think, and this is where some nuance I think is important to get into this dialogue.
Hmm.
There also needs to be a class analysis in how different social classes engage with fascism, because uh, there's an argument that gets brought up a lot where somebody like Richard Spencer, who was an alt-right leader during the 2010s, who is now like pretty quiet, I think, due to his divorce he's in the middle of. But he is like an upper middle class fascist, ideological fascist, but he has no state power. And but then there's also the neo-Nazi movements, which are oftentimes working class or lumpen proletariat, or like what we would call the underclass, the people that often are experiencing houselessness or incarceration. I've worked with a lot of people who would be considered lumpen proletariat, white nationalist fascists, just by nature of working in the prison system. And the thing that is really, really important for mental health workers in these spaces is, so you might have a Crip, you might have a Blood, you might have a American Nazi Party, you might have a Patriot Front person, and sociologically they're going to be coming from different spaces. However, when you're actually in the room with the person, you're oftentimes dealing with a young male with serious anger issues and serious meaning making issues, uh, as well as utilizing violence as a communication tool, which that's something that uh, a lot of people don't understand about violence, is in the most marginalized classes. They don't have the ability to sue you. They don't have the ability to send an army to blow you up. They don't have the ability to put a media campaign out to smear you. They don't have just endless resources to pay for things or harass you. So the way that they utilize gaining power is through oftentimes like physical confrontation. Um, and and it's just really interesting, because what I find so fascinating about working with the different social classes of fascism is so, like, look at this current movement that Trump has really been the head of the last decade. But he utilized the alt right and the alt light in to really pump up things, and look at all of those people that were actively involved in getting him uh, into power and promoting nationalism and white nationalism specifically all over the internet. A lot of them are either in jail, or their lives were completely ruined, or like they were just thrown out. They were utilized as an object to gain power. And then you also saw that through the QAnon movement, where Q, like, it like dropped the blatant white nationalist talking points, though it was very much in there all the time, and got more into like the conspiratorial aspects of fascism. And look at, so many QAnon people, their lives have been ruined by engaging with these movements. I've worked with so many people who either had people who were QAnon in their life, or were QAnon affected themselves, and just the impact it had on their personal relationships and dynamics. Like, there are people who lost contact with family members due to this. And the reason I point all of this out is that when you look at the different social classes, the elite class of fascists, they use all the other social classes of fascism, and they use them for their own power mechanisms and don't care that, these people who were fighting for you, who were speaking out on your behalf, like they just don't, like they don't, it to me it shows the
Yeah.
classism that
Well,
also
well,
is
even
is yeah.
even beyond the classism, and I'm glad you brought back to personal relationships because I started off with mine. Like, while I still associate with those family members, right? There are some difficulties there, right? To say the least, right? And again, right? As you also, pointed out, implicitly, it's like most people who are fascist, right? They seem as normal people and aren't doing the horrid actions, right? They give their tacit support through a vote, through a social media post, through a spreading of ideas, right? Which then gives, justification for the actual brown shirts, black shirts, right? The ICE, the whatever force it may be that is doing the actual, right? So they have the cheerleaders, which are the large portion. Then you have the actual paramilitary style individuals, and then you have capital at the head of it all, right? As a social democrat, I don't think that this is the inevitable natural direction that capitalism has to go, right? But there is a clear connection between how capitalism can express itself into fascism. I've been looking at your general strike poster the whole time in the back, and an article that I did get published with Philosophy Today is one on how fascists will never participate in a general strike for these very obvious sort of business interest reasons, right? There is a connection there, it seems, between money and fascism in all the ways it has been currently expressed. And so the class analysis here is how can you have fascists from so many different backgrounds? But again, if we look at capital, right, in capitalism, it's a system of competition. Fascism is a system of competition, right? And so everyone's supposed to compete within and outside of these societies, right? These are competition-based sorts of rhetorics. If you didn't make it, you didn't pull up your bootstraps hard enough, right? You didn't compete well enough. And so what it does is it spreads that idea of competition society-wide. In an Aristotelian sense, Aristotle spoke to how the people are often a reflection of the form of government. In the American context, if the head is a marketer, con man, kind of just like trying to like, get little deals here and there, then the people are going to reflect that. Lo and behold, there's been an explosion in scams and cryptocurrency and like people even cheering on the shutting down of the Financial Protection Bureau, right? So this is where we are at. Now, I am personally someone that, yes, I think it would be nice to, organize a general strike. I think we're at that point, right? I think one of the things that I have written about is like phone banking, quote unquote, influencers to go about this, as opposed to like relying on politicians at this point, right, to just get people gathered up. But unfortunately, the state where we're at right now, right, a general strike in its most ideal sense could probably only garner up 10% of Americans. Not to say that's the only amount of people that are against American fascism, but these reflections of society have taken hold. Pull up your bootstraps, get ahead, right? This system of competition and power economically then ends up seeping into the psychology and the sociality and then into the body politic, and it becomes a feedback loop. This is something that Aristotle missed in his political analysis because he was the person who invented political science. He
Right.
didn't have
Right.
an economic or class analysis, right? So any weirdos like Curtis Yarvin who think Aristotle solved politics for that reason alone, no, brilliant man, had his issues, obviously. But at the end of the day, right, Aristotle does a good job at pointing how the body politic can be, sorry, the people can be the reflection of the body politic, thus the term, but how the economics can also reflect onto the people. When you create a system of competition, people are going to, well, compete and encourage competition and get at one another. This is one of the reasons I am a social democrat. It can take those competitive elements out of the picture. Like, hey, we don't need to compete to such a point where people are, not alive. And so I think that's, kind of pointing to the class analysis. The class analysis is how this system of economic competition feeds back into political competition, feedback loop, and just competition feeds into itself until you end up with, well, sometimes potentially fascism.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I I love everything that you're saying, and just how this does get into the weaponization of postmodernism. Um, so I guess let's come to a close.
Yeah.
Is there anything that that you feel we did not address that should be addressed before we close out?
Yeah, I think we're at the point where, look, at the end of the day, as an academic, right, I'd rather be talking about the general things I was talking about before, right? I think this is a not a waste of time because it has to be done right now, but I'd rather be focusing on the philosophy of disability, something not with me personally, but with my girlfriend, right, who has very
Yes.
obviously physical disabilities, right? I'd rather be talking about the philosophy of homelessness right now, something that's an
Yeah.
ongoing issue, right? And this fascism only gets in the way of just moving forward. And I think the problem we have right now amongst the general left is a lot of people being like, well, I have this little area where I'm against you on this little issue. And right now it's about like,
Yep.
very large solidarity and figuring out later, right? And I think at the end of the day, it's just, and even if it's not successful, right? It's still about just having that general middle finger, bringing something to the table, and just try something at this point. And so I think right now the main thing, in my personal opinion, and it's opinion I'm seeing grow amongst others, it's like, look, we can put aside smaller differences because at the end of the day, our general shared goal is improved material conditions, right? I'm not going to fight with a democratic socialist on government ownership. I'm not going to fight with a Marxist communist on the nature of structural organization, right? If you're somewhat unreasonable, maybe, but if you're within
Yeah.
reasonable realm of wanting to improve material conditions, let's come to the table together, liberals, greens, etc., of that sort. I think, because at the end of the day, what fascists do very well is they're good at unifying disparate people towards
Yes.
one end, and that end of hypernationalism, right? They get a bunch of people together. Hey, do you like America? Do you like Italy? Do you like Germany? And a lot of people go with sort of a natural, nationalistic education that occurs in every country. Go, yeah, of course my country is good. You know, Often, again, this isn't felt in every country.
Yes.
So
Yes.
they're good at
Yes.
rallying around that. Meanwhile, I don't know how the general left has been really bad at rallying around. Do you want like food? I don't understand. I don't understand how this has been a more appealing mythos than the mythos of, hey, which is not a mythos, it's a materiality, because that
Yeah.
one's a mythos, a country, but no important. Um, to, point like, hey, how come we haven't just rallied together around, hey, maybe make people's lives less shit?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. That.
and I think that's where we're at. Just come together, what we're doing any of this shit for, talking, spreading ideas, organizing, etc. If that's things that you're doing, is to, hey, let's like make life less shitty for other people. That's it.
I
I think
mean,
that's a
this.
fair thing.
Yeah. This is exactly the point. That I think is important right now is the left has failed in regards to making a safe environment to communicate about ideas that are conflicting. Like, and the thing that is so frustrating about it, and I get the sense that we sometimes argue as if we're supposed to be a fundamentalist to our tendency, but we
Or if we
also
have
in our,
power.
yeah, or in our lived practice, like, do we actually like apply all the principles in every state? Like, like I
How?
try to explain this to people. It's like, yo, I'm a father. my child loves Paw Patrol. Like, I can't stop at that. What I can do is make sure to have dialogue with her and talk to her about the complexities of it. Also, but because I've actually watched the show so much, this to any parents out there, the wrong criticism is that it's propaganda. Like, yes, it is propaganda, but we live in the United States of America. Like, you're going to see propaganda on TV. The much more sinister and insidious piece of Paw Patrol is that every industry is privately owned by one man, and he's the guy who owns Paw Patrol. They own sanitation, they own policing, they own
I don't
fire,
know
they
about the
own construction.
fundamentals
Yeah,
of Paw Patrol. That's an
exactly.
anarcho-capitalist nightmare.
Right. Well, and so like the point is that like I am probably the closest internally to a libertarian socialist, but I also vote as social democrat as I possibly can, but I also
Yeah,
hang out with card carrying anarchists, and I also think Marxist theory is some of the best theory to study revolutionary movements
yeah,
on.
yeah.
And it's just one of those pieces where we get we I think as leftists are oftentimes empathetic people or compassionate people, not all the time, but I do think that there is a certain amount of like you care about what you're standing for, and so there's going to be something that's going to irk you. I gotta put it this way though, is um, is that we have to remember we're working with real human beings all the time. And this includes the activists and the theorists you're working with directly. Everybody is a human being. We all have contradictions that are going on internally. We should not be thinking about things as perfection. I'll tell you all this as a white person who engages in Black liberation work as my centerpiece of just where my sort of activism stems from. All the complaints that I hear about white people when being in Black spaces, like it's like, oh, well, you can't even say this thing, or well, I didn't even mean,
This
or
is people who don't hang out with others because people are more multifaceted than just this like general, I'm gonna take offense.
yeah, well, it's also like the thing I found like with white liberals specifically is there's this like over cautiousness that ends
Oh
up
yeah.
becoming extremely racist. And like the thing I try to emphasize to folks is like, yo, I've literally been in all Black spaces where some of the people are in for murder charges, so they're very capable of going and utilizing violence. And I have said absolutely insane accidental racist shit in front of people. And people have said, what'd you say? And I've been like, oh shit, what'd I say? I let them correct me. We work through it. Everybody laughs. Like it literally turns out fine. And I try to emphasize to folks, it's like, what did you say? How did you respond? It's like, just because you said something and you didn't realize it might have been a trigger to somebody. And I'll put this tad bit of nuance to complete this conversation, but
Yeah.
Bonita, who's also been on the podcast, and she'll be on again, she and I have been talking a lot about classism within the Black community because I have found as a lower middle class white person who works with underclass Black people primarily, but when in the composer music space am around a lot of upper middle class Black folks, I've found that some of the communication will actually be a trigger for upper middle class Black folks. And there's a reactionary way to respond to that, and there's a humanistic way to respond to that. The
Yeah.
reactionary way is like, I can't stand how I have to walk around eggshells. Like it gets annoying, or it's like like there's this sort, and I've had the impulse. I want to emphasize to folks that the impulse is real. It's a real impulse to feel, and you can work through it. You can work through it to learn that it's an impulse you don't have to succumb to. But the biggest piece is that it's okay to make mistakes. Make the mistake. Be accountable for the mistake. And literally, these issues do not happen. And the reason why this is an important dialogue is there is a relatable thing on, like, let's say you're talking to a Trotskyist, a Marxist Leninist, a Marxist humanist, an anarcho-communist, a Green Party liberal, like let's say you're all in the group, like having a conversation. What are you going to actually utilize in that space for making sure all of our communities are better? Like what are
Yeah.
we going to, and it's like all of us have the goal of making our communities better. That is an essential piece of it. And it just we should not be fundamentalists. Like there was a gentleman I knew who made a point of like, oh, I know I'm not a good socialist. Like he said, I'm not a good socialist about something, and it was like, yo, this isn't a religion. Like
These are
you know,
general principles.
yeah,
Yeah.
like these are principles. It's like, for fuck's sake, like Star Wars was the thing that began
To
my
be to Well, no,
radicalization
no, but and this
journey.
is goes
Like,
back to the hermeneutic violence, right? Like to
yeah,
be a social, like I am a socialist, I am a Maoist. It's like for me, it's like when I say I'm a social democrat, it's just a label for me to describe general ideas that I have, right?
yeah,
At the end of the day, right? For me, in an academic position, right? I'm not as like, upfront. I'm not going to shy away from my beliefs, but I'm not like every week going in like, all right, we're going to be anti-fa. No, like I teach on Epicureanism. As I mentioned before, disability, right? And what I also try to do very well is try to like even and I'm like, look, I have my biases, I have a bias statement on my syllabus, but I tell my students, one, your grade will never be affected by your disagreement with a certain idea. Number two, whenever I present an idea in class, I try to give the flip of it, like, try to give the steel men for all positions, even if I
yeah.
don't agree with them. The only time where I've said I'll make exception to that is like, we're not talking about fascism in here, right? Like, that's just not, that's something I'll never talk about in a positive light. But, aside, or colonization, but you know what I mean? Like, give the sort of, like, gentrification is a weird example of like, there are people that argue in favor of gentrification. Why? Well, it's in order for you to understand the full position, it's to understand the
Yeah.
flip side. Doesn't mean you have to advocate, doesn't mean you have to agree, doesn't mean it has to be true. And so in this sort of way, right, I think what ends up happening is that, you know, a lot of individuals on the left get hermeneutically violent, almost get, as you said, religious about a certain position, as opposed to being more postmodern about, oh, there is no grand narrative. There is a narrative we're trying to move forward with, make things
Yeah.
better, right? There is no one essential definition of the socialist, the social democrat, this and that, right? There are further interpretations, right? That's what I was trying to say. When I give the flip side of
Yeah.
things, I don't say like both are good. I just give both informations as their strongest argument while still being like, hey, this is
Yeah.
bad, this is this, etc. Right? And it's a hard balance because I'm not perfect at it, right? I make
Hmm.
verb slips and all that. But I think at the end of the day, right, it's that mixture of intent and action. It's what you want to do and what you actually do. And at the end of the day, I think, talking about this stuff is both intent and action to one, be like, middle finger to fascists. I'm going to talk about this sort of stuff. You're not going to scare or silence me. But number two, more productively, all right, what are we going to keep doing? Who's on board with this? Now that we have a theoretical framework, we can catch this sort of stuff and just do something about it. Oh, what's
Hmm.
like, and I think part of what we have to do is be more postmodern ourselves. Go back to the Deleuze and Derrida and be like, hey, okay with not having the one and all be all right narrative, right? Greenism, Marxism, socialism, right? These aren't the truths of reality. There are frameworks by which to
Yeah.
understand and hopefully improve human
Yeah.
organization towards mass material well-being.
Yeah. And to put a psychological twist to it, and this is kind of like a factoid, so don't if this doesn't line up exactly with research, please forgive. But kind of a general concept that I think about is human beings, if like I'll make a number up, but like five positive things happen to you and one negative thing happens to you, you're going to remember the negative thing as an aversion to protect yourself. But we're actually experiencing five positive things, and that's where like Buddhism really comes in handy, or existential thought. I find where it really does help just process the actual lived experience that you're in. um And I completely lost my train of thought.
Well, well,
Yeah.
I hope I was able to help with understanding our
Yes.
unfortunate lived experience that is neither
Yes.
Buddhist, let alone leftist by any sorts of means.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
All
well.
right.
This, I mean, not an oh
Awesome.
well in a dismissive way, but oh well, proceed on. And at the end of the day, again, I just do something, man. Like as an
Yeah.
academic, am not afraid to talk about this stuff, trying to talk with students that both, I mean, not in my school, thankfully so far, but I mean, FIU, not too far down the road from Dade College, Kendall, 18 students deported and a direct agreement with ICE went to the FIU campus, even as a non-member of that faculty, to show support to those students. So at the end of the day, it's these sorts of things, just you got to do what you can, even if you can't do it all. And don't forget to be with your families, take care of your other obligations, right? You gotta live your life, but also, find the balances you can and contribute to. And that's I wish I had a more optimistic final note, but
Yeah.
that's all you can do.
Yeah. Well, it was really great speaking with you.
Yeah.
Are just to confirm, I just and I'm asking, I'll just ask bluntly. You mentioned that you're Cuban. Are you safe in your
Yeah, no, I
situation?
think at the end of the day, there's not a,
Yeah.
what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah.
Eh, When it comes to, my own personal background, I do have a
Yes.
lot of privileges being half Cuban, literally Cuban slash American, right? And that's sort of like parent from one side, parent from the other.
Yeah.
Um, and so in the position I'm in, right, I'm very able to get away and do things that I may
Mhm.
not otherwise. So for me, it's like, okay, I am blessed, I am lucky, right? Like there's a lot of things I can do. So why wouldn't I, right? And so at the end of the day, I think the thing that is going on in my sphere more so is the various issues with higher education, mainly in regards to just students being kidnapped. No other mincing of words for that. In addition with open education, trying to be cut off through like using either funding as a stick or getting administrators into various schools that are, in line with what's happening, right? This is very much true with one of the schools I speak at. I mean, not speak at, but yes, I do. Miami-Dade College, very much appointed entirely by Ron DeSantis in favor of all this sort of stuff. Meanwhile, the Catholic university I work for, ironically enough, has a lot of liberation theologists in their units, so they're more like like so it's just the interesting sort of dynamics of that in the worst way. But yeah, the most obviously prescient of those is quite frankly, the kidnapping of students, followed
Yeah.
with the inability to go about proper open education without violating university policy or even law in the state of Florida, which I've broken in my lectures multiple times interpretively.
Wow. Okay. Well, with that, thank you
That's where
so.
we're at. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Dorian. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope
Thank you.
to, yeah, I hope this helps anybody have either whatever purposes they need to use this for. I hope that my coming on here was helpful in any way.
Yeah. And how can people find you? What's the easiest way if people
Just
want to
Google
check
my
out your
full
work?
name, Anthony David Vernon, and then
Cool.
you'll find me and can probably get in touch with me somehow if that's what you want to do, or find other stuff I'm writing if that's anything I'm talking about is helpful. Maybe my wit and words are entertaining, helpful, whatever it may be.
Awesome. Thank you again so much. And yeah, we'll be
Have a
back.
good one, sir.
This machine kills fascists. This machine kills fascists. This machine kills fascists. This machine kills fascists. This machine machine